Welcome back, everybody. My name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking. In this series, we are rebuilding the user interface of popular applications in SwiftUI. So previously we rebuilt Spotify, and right now we are in the middle of rebuilding Bumble. This is the third video in the Bumble section. So if you missed the first two, go check those out first and then come on back to this one. Those are available for free on this channel in this playlist. In this video, we are now going to look at the swiping gestures in our Bumble app. We're going to talk a lot about how to implement these gestures and how to approach it as a developer. I think at the end of the day, the code is actually not that difficult, but it's really about strategically knowing kind of where to place the code and what to actually do at a high level. And so we're going to take the time here to really just build it from scratch out of the box. So in this video, I'm really going to take the time to go step by step in implementing the swipe gestures, because I want you guys to understand how I'm thinking about it, how I'm approaching this, so that you can then go ahead and approach it in your own apps, especially if your own app has a slightly different implementation. You should be able to modify it using the knowledge that we are learning or the approaches that we're learning in this video. All right, we are back and we are building Bumble, or at least a mock version of it. Hope you guys are excited. We did a lot of work in the last video, get the profile going here, and the profile is looking really nice. I do think that it is looking great, but we haven't added any swipe gestures yet, and that's the next thing that we're going to do. So if I look at the final product, we have swipe gestures go left and right, and then there's little icons that come in on top as well. And so I want to make sure that the swipe gestures are working first, then we're going to add these icons, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how we can interact, because we need this scroll to work alongside the swipe gesture, right? We need these to simultaneously action. So we can't have the swipe gesture always be priority over the scroll gesture. We'll talk a little bit about how we handle that as well. So let's get going here. I'm going to start with just basic swipe gestures. Back on my card view here, I'm going to delete the spacer from the bottom because we do not need it. And I have my card view here. But what I'm going to do for this video is actually just use rectangles while we create the swipe gestures. I don't want to have to deal with this actual view and loading the data. Let's just work with simple shapes. Let's get the swipe gestures working, and then let's replace the shapes with our card view. So a shape's going to be like a basic rectangle. Beautiful. Let's give it a fill of, let's just go color.blue. All right, so this is our shape. Let's go red. Let's try to draw some on the screen. So what we're going to do is have an array of users that we're going to be looping on. So up at the top of our screen, let's start with our fake data. We'll do an @state private var. We'll call this users. Let's call this all users of type array of user. We'll set it equal to a blank array. And we'll create a quick task when we load up this screen. And I'm just going to load in the users like we did in previous videos. So if you're with me in previous videos, we had load data functions. So in our Spotify, we added this load data function here. I'm just going to copy that, jump back into our Bumble home view. Let's create a load data function. And let's load up the users. So all users, let's make sure that all users is empty, because we already have our array of data. Then we don't need to refetch. Let's set the all users equal to the result of get users, not the first one. And we don't have products on the screen, so let's just delete all of these. Quick, simple, await, get data. While we're here, let's make sure that the toolbar is hidden for the nav bar, because we're using our own in this video. We should have an array of users. Let's in here create a ZStack. We're going to say if all users is empty, if it is not empty, let's draw on the screen our rectangle. That's looking pretty good. You'll notice that while it's loading, we get this little ugly jump, right? Because the starting state is now empty, and we don't have this pushed to the top. And that's a pretty bad UX. We can see that it jumps up when it starts loading. So what we're going to do is actually take the ZStack and we're going to give it a frame with a max height of infinity. This way, even if this is not loaded, the frame is still there and we're not pushing this around while we are loading data. If it is loading, let's just say else. Let's add a progress view just so that we can get a quick little loading indicator on it. And what I want to do is draw basically a profile for all of the users on the screen. Now, if I look at the actual implementation here, right, I can see the current user, the one that we're swiping on, and the next one is going to be loaded behind it, right? Those are like the same images, but we can see the current one and the next one. So we want to draw at least these two on the screen at the same time. Now, the first thought you might have is let's draw all of them on the screen at once, right? So then you would have a Z stack here where you have, let's do for each. Let's go for each users, all users. This would be user in, and then let's put a rectangle on the screen. So the problem with this approach is that we're not using any sort of like lazy V stack here or lazy stack. So if I were to do this and I had hundreds of users in my array, we're now going to draw hundreds of users onto the screen. And just to prove that, if I put this as a V stack, we can actually see a red rectangle for all of the users. So right now we're going to be drawing every single user on the screen, which is going to load up every single user profile. That's going to be really slow. Imagine all of this data needs to load at one time. Just too much, and we don't really need it. So really what we need is the current profile and then the next profile to be loaded. So really just two profiles at a time. What we're also going to do is actually the previous profile. So after I swipe this, I don't want it to just disappear off the screen. I want to keep it in memory so that it animates nicely off the screen. So I'm going to render 3 cells on the screen here. It's going to be the previous, the current, and the next. And everything else, if it's not the previous, current, and next, I don't care about it right now. We don't need to render it on our screen. So what we're going to do up here is let's start with a @state private var. We'll call this selected index of type integer, and we'll start at the 0 index, the first index. And we're just going to move this index around as we swipe through the cards. So we'll start with index 0. And as we loop on these, we need to know which index the user is at. So what we're going to do is take all users and call .enumerated. It's going to return us a sequence. We want to convert that sequence into an array. So let's wrap it in an array. So it's back into an array here. And then we need to pass in some sort of hashable value to loop on. So I'll go \dot. We can loop on the element, which is each user in this array, or the offset, which is the index of each item in this array. So the offset's going to be unique because the indexes are unique. So let's just go .offset here. And the enumerated is actually giving us back 2 values. It's giving us the index as well as the actual object. So this will be the index and the user. So I put on the screen here an overlay. I can put it in a quick text with the index, and we should see that it's from 0 to 29. All right. Now what I want to do is just check, is this cell the previous cell, the current cell, or the next cell? Because if it's not, I don't want to render it on the screen. So firstly, let's say let isCurrent is equal to if the selected index, so the one up here, is equal to the index that we were looping on. And we'll say if isCurrent, put this on the screen. Great. Now we only have index 0. Let's also render at the same time though the next one. So we'll say if the index is equal to the current selected index plus 1, meaning the next index. And then, so we're going to draw it on the screen if it is current or if it is next. So now we have 2 cells. And let's also go with the previous. So I'm going to copy and paste this. I'm going to say is previous if the selected index minus 1 is equal to the index. So right now there is no -1 because we don't have a previous. But if I move this forward 1, we should be able to see 3 on the screen. And it looks like it's actually not on the screen. So we need to add here, if is previous or is current or is next, put it on the screen. So now I have 3 on the screen. Cool. Let's move this back down to 0. And let's switch this now from a V stack. I just did a V stack so we could see the cells. We really want them to be in a Z stack. And let's show this. All right. So I know right now, again, from the V stack, that let's move this forward again, just so we can see it. We can see now that the first cell is index 0, the second one is index 1, and the third one is index 2. And so if the current selected index is 1, then we should see number 1 on the screen. But if I put this back to a Z stack, we can see number 2 on the screen, right? And that's because we're rendering all 3 of these cells, and the bottommost one in the Z stack is going to be on top. So we can see here that the topmost cell is number 2. What we really want to do is reverse the Z index for each of the objects in this Z stack, so that we want, right now, this is in the back, this is in the middle, this is in the front. And we want to reverse that. So this is in the back, this is in the middle, this is in the front. So what we're going to do is basically just on the object itself, we're just going to change the Z index. Rather than increasing, we're going to make them decreasing. So let's make it a double, and we're going to look for the last user. So all users.count, and then we're going to go minus the index. So the first one is going to be all users. Let's say there's 100. 100 minus index of 0 is 100. So it'll be on top. The second one will be 100 minus 1, 99. So it will be second and third and fourth. So now we get 0 back on top here. I'm going to move the selected index back to 0 for now. And we're going to keep moving forward. The next thing we're going to do is add a drag gesture onto this. Now I'm going to use, again, I'm going to import here SwiftUI. And we're going to use a with drag gesture modifier that is in that framework. We're going to say with drag gesture. I'm going to hold the Option button and click enter on this. I'm going to triple click it and then Control M to format it. This with drag gesture, I'm going to jump into it real quick. You can add this yourself if you want. It is just a view modifier. The drag gesture view modifier looks like this. It's a lot of code that you probably don't want to write yourself. So I'm obviously recommending using a package, but it's basically just adding a drag gesture onto the view. And then every time it changes or it ends, we can trigger some action. There's a little bit of logic in here so that while you are dragging, we can change the offset of the actual drag. I've covered this on my channel in the SwiftUI Continue Learning playlist. We talked about drag gestures, how to implement them. This is basically just a generic reusable version of that implementation. So use it if you want, rewrite it if you want. This package is public, it's on my GitHub, but I don't want to go through all of that logic right now. So right now, let's just keep our with drag gesture. I'm going to drag this horizontally. We're not going to drag up and down. We're just going to drag left and right. And the minimum distance, I'm going to keep at 0 for now. Resets, let's do true. Animation, we don't need. It's going to use the default animation. Most of this I'm going to comment out for now. Let's comment all of this out. We're on change. So while we're dragging, if we want to get the offset, let's click enter here. This is going to be the offset while it is dragging. We're going to do something, and then this will be the on ended. So when the user lets go of the drag, this will be our action here. Let's render this on the screen quick. Firstly, I can see I can now drag these. Just to make this a little more clear, let's just say here, if the index is equal to 0, red, otherwise blue. So now we should be able to see the blue one behind it. So drag gesture is working. First and foremost, I want to add some of these modifiers here. So resets is by default true. What that basically means is if this was false and I drag and I let go, it stops and it stays wherever I dragged it to. But I want it to bounce back. So if I don't fully swipe it off the screen, it bounces back, and that's great. Animation, we're going to use the default. Rotation multiplier, right now we can see that it's just animating directly to the right. But if I look at Bumble's UI, it kind of moves to the right. You can see the little rotation as I swipe to the right? So I'm going to add a quick rotation multiplier here. Let's go maybe 1.05, so about 5% of the swipe gesture. And that looks better already. The scale multiplier, we're not going to use. I don't think that Bumble actually scales down their cards. I think Tinder does though. So if we wanted to do like 0.8, we could see that as we swipe, it gets a little bit smaller to swipe off the edge of the device. But I don't think Bumble actually does that. So we'll comment this out for now. And now we need to actually, when we let go, I want it to actually animate off the screen. So again, if you remember correctly, I'm drawing 3 objects onto the screen: previous, current, and next. So even if I'm on the current one, the previous one will still render. And what I'm going to do is basically animate the offset of the previous one so that if I swiped, it's going to be way all the way to the left or way all the way to the right of the screen so that I can't actually see it on the screen. It'll be still drawn on the view, but it'll be so offset to the left or the right that the user can't see it and will only be working with the current one. So what we're going to do is on this entire object, let's just add an offset here. Let's go offset of X, and let's just say, just to show you what we're doing, let's go offset of 100. Moving it to the right a little bit. If we do 300, it moves it to the right more, 400. If I go all the way out to like 900, it's way off to the right that I can't see it. So basically, if the user swiped right, we're going to offset to the 900. If they swiped left, we'll offset to negative 900. So what we want to do is create some sort of state to hold that data, whether or not the user moved it left or right. So up at the top of my screen here, I'm going to create a at state private var. Let's call this card offsets of type. Let's make this a dictionary with an integer and a Boolean. Set it equal to a blank dictionary for now. So the reason I'm using integer is because if I look at the users, if I go into a user, the ID of the user is an integer. So I'm going to save the ID for each user as the key in the dictionary. And then there's going to be a Boolean. It's going to be either true or false. And if they swiped true, that's going to be right. If they swiped false, it's going to be left. So here, let's just put a little comment. The key is going to be the user ID. And then the value will be, if the direction is right, then that equals true. Just to keep a little bit of logic for the other developers who jump in here. So now when I swipe, I just want to add into this card offset dictionary the key and the value of true or false. So if I come back down here, let's try to get the offset. So firstly, let's get the let offset value, and this will set equal to the card offsets, the dictionary we just created for the user.id. So this card offset is going to be an optional Boolean, meaning if there's no value in this dictionary yet, it will be nil. If it's to the right, it'll be true. If it's to the left, it will be false. So here, if the offset value, we'll say if the offset value is equal to nil, so it's not in the dictionary yet, then 0. Let's keep it as is where it is. Otherwise, if the offset value is equal to true, let's go 900 to the right. Otherwise, let's go negative 900 to the left. So the default starting state obviously is 0, and we can see it back on the screen here. All right, now when we are ending our drag, so on the onEnded here, we actually want to add a little bit of logic for what we're going to actually do. And we need to do a couple things. First, we need to decide if they're going left or right. And based on that, we need to add either true or false into the dictionary here. And then secondly, we need to increase the selected index to go to the next card. So a couple things that we need to do. So I'm going to create a function to hold all of that logic together so that I can reuse it. Let's come down here. Let's create a private func, and let's call this user selection, or user did select. And they're going to select a card at an index of type integer. So we're going to get the current index so that we can get the current user from there. And we're going to add whether or not they're liking it or disliking it. So we'll add a Boolean here for is like of type bool, and open the brackets. Firstly, let's get the current user. So the current user is going to be all users at the index that we're swiping on. Then let's set the offset. So in our card offsets, at the user.id is going to be equal to the result of is like. So if is like is true, the result will be true. If it's like is false, the result will be false. After we add the offset, we're going to then want to increment the current offset so we can go to the next card. So selected index plus equals 1. So add it to the next one. Awesome. Let's come back up to our onChanged and let's look at a little bit of code here. Firstly, let's put the data on the screen. So what I'm going to do is add here, let's do offset of type, maybe ggfloat. And then this will be the current offset for 1 second. I'm going to put that on the screen, the offset. And as we end, let's just set the offset equal to the drag offset dot, maybe the width. So when I let go, we can see what the offset was, negative 127, positive 76, negative 113. So I want to try to find, I'm going to play around with this a little bit and try to figure out what is a good threshold for actually registering as a swipe event. So if the user just does this little tiny bit, that's not enough. I don't want that to actually be a swipe now. But I do think if they get to maybe somewhere around here, that's enough. So let's do maybe 50, negative 50, and then positive 50 maybe. So we're going to say here, if the drag offset dot width, if it is less than negative 50, meaning swiping to the left, then we're going to trigger our function called user did select at the index is false. Then we'll say else if the drag offset dot width is greater than 50, let's go user did select and is true. And we'll get rid of this offset here. We don't need to put this on the screen anymore. Let's put this back to the index. So now I should be able to swipe, let go, and it will offset. And it kind of just jumps off the screen right now, but we want to animate it off the screen. So let's add in some animation. On the entire Z stack here, so we got a Z stack holding all of the cards. Let's just add in some .animation. Let's make it maybe smooth. And we're going to do on change of the card offsets. So when those offsets trying to move it to the left or the right, it should animate off the screen. And that looks much better. We got our swiping going. We are really getting there, guys. The next thing I want to do is work on the overlay indicators. So we can see here that if I swipe right, from the right side, we get this little icon that pops in, the check mark. You see the check mark coming in? And if I swipe left, we get the X mark coming in. Let's add in some cool effect because I really like the animation of that. It's a good feel, and we can do that actually pretty quickly. Before we actually do that, I'm going to take this rectangle with the drag gesture, which is going to be our card view. I'm going to cut it, and I'll come down here, and let's just create a private function called the user profile cell. And this will return us some view, open the brackets. Inside here, we need to pass in the index. So we'll put index of type integer. Let's put this on the screen here. This will be the user profile cell. Pass in the index for now. Looking pretty good. Let's add in these swipe indicators. So what I'm going to do is add them in this Z stack on top of all of the cards. We're going to have one more layer, which I'll just put a quick little rectangle here just to show you what we're doing. And you'll notice immediately, as soon as I draw this rectangle in the Z stack, even though it's below all of these, we can't see this one. And that's because the Z index here, we increase our Z index of all the cards. So this is going to be like 100 minus 0, 100 minus 1. So this has a Z index of 1 by default. I'm going to make this just at the top of all of the cards. So let's add here a Z index of like 99999. So it's way at the top. And now I can see the black rectangle on top of the screen. Let's start with just the left one for now. So let's add a Z stack, and then I'll get rid of the rectangle. We're going to add here a circle. Let's give this a fill of .bumble gray. Make it opacity of 0.4 so it's a little bit see-through, so you can see the cards behind it. Let's give this an overlay. We're going to add the check mark here. So we're going to do an image, a system name. Sorry, this will be the X mark. Let's go font of title. Let's go font weight of semi-bold. And let's make the entire circle have a frame, maybe 60 by 60. Sweet. Now I want this to animate while I'm dragging, not at the end of my drag, right? So while I'm in the mid drag, I want this to animate onto the screen. So here I'm going to look for in the drag gesture, there's another closure for on change. So while it's changing during the drag, what do I want to do? So again, let's put this text on the screen just so that we can see it really quickly. So what I'm going to do again, let's add up here a dot, let's say offset of type CG float, set it equal to 0. And put that offset on top of our cells. So where's our cell? Our cell, let's put the offset on top of the cell here. And while I'm changing, let's change the offset equal to the drag offset width. So same thing we just did, except now we can see the offset while I'm dragging, right? -50, -80. And I want to animate this X mark while the drag is happening. So we're going to do a couple different things here. Firstly, on here, let's add some offset. Let's offset it. The X is what we're looking at. And we're going to go, let's actually make this the current swipe offset. That's what we'll call this. And let's fix this down here. So here we're going to say if the current swipe offset, that's how much we'll offset it by. We'll offset it by the actual offset itself. All right, so while I'm swiping now, I should see it move, right? All right, it's kind of looking good. It is moving with our card, but we want it to move in reverse. So if I swipe left, it actually comes in from the left side and moves right. I'll show you one more time. If I swipe left, it moves to the right. So here, let's actually make this the negative offset. I can see it moves reverse now, a little bit better. I can see it's a little jumpy as I slide it. It's because there's no animation on it. Let's add in some animation. Let's actually copy the same animation and then just make this for the current swipe offset. A little smoother now. I think that's a little bit better. There's a couple ways to get this off the screen, and we're going to kind of hack it together. I think this is just a quick way to do it. What we're going to do is add a frame here with a max width of infinity. And let's add a background here of color.blue so we can see the frame. This is the frame that it's in. Inside this frame, let's add alignment to the leading edge, of course. And now I want to actually offset it so it's off the screen. So let's just go an extra, like maybe 100 pixels off the screen. So I'm literally just going to add a manual offset of X, and let's go negative 100. So now it should be over here somewhere. And you can see it kind of come in from the left side of the screen. And that looks much closer to what we actually want. The last thing is as it comes in, I don't want it to go all the way across the screen. So you can see here as I swipe, it gets kind of stuck at this left edge here. So there's a maximum value we want it to offset. So I would have to play around with this for all the different devices. But for right now, let's just try to figure out what is the maximum amount that we want it to be here. Well, let's just comment this out for a second. What if we put this as 150? Where does it go? That actually looks pretty good out of the box. I'll make it 200. Maybe that's a little too far. Let's go 150. So 150 is the maximum that we want it to be. So we're going to set this value equal to the minimum of the negative swipe offset or 150. So if the negative swipe offset ends up being 200, it's going to be the minimum and it'll revert to 150. So I can swipe and it kind of gets stuck there, which looks much better. The last thing is I want to scale it in. I want it to get a little bit bigger as I swipe. You can see here that it starts off kind of small and it gets a little bit bigger as it gets closer to the edge of the device. So what we're going to do here, we're going to add another scale modifier. And I don't really care if we're swiping left or right here. So let's just take the absolute size of the current swipe offset. So whether or not it's positive or negative, it's just going to give us the number of how much we have offset by. And it looks like, so the maximum we're doing is 150. So I want to do this scale a little bit before we hit the maximum. So let's say somewhere around 100. So we'll say if the swipe offset is greater than 100, let's scale it up 1.5 times. Otherwise 1.0, we'll leave it at the default. So now I can swipe. It should get a little bit bigger as we get to 150. And that looks nice. I hope you guys see kind of how we hack these things together. You got to get really creative here. Once you start building these out in SwiftUI, you'll get better at figuring out how to do these effects. This is part of the reason why I chose this one to cover in this course, is because figuring out a lot of this UI, it's really not that difficult to code, but it's about understanding how to get creative to really get these modifiers to work for you. Let's copy this and add one more on the right side here. So I'm going to do the same thing, except this will be a check mark. And we're basically just going to do the reverse of everything that we just did. So the scale effect is the same, except the offset, let's do the minimum of the negative swipe offset or negative 150. So the reverse. The offset by default, let's go positive 100. And the frame, let's put it on the right side with the trailing edge. Actually, we want now the maximum because we inverse the numbers here. So this should be the maximum of this. So now it should be on the right. And if I swipe right, the check comes in. If I swipe left, the X comes in. Let's get rid of these backgrounds and swipe right, swipe left. And these look pretty good with not that much code. I'm going to cut the animation. I'm going to leave the Z index out of this, but I'm going to cut this And I'm going to come down to my code and I'm going to make a private variable. Let's call this the overlay swiping indicators of type some view. Paste these in here. And then we'll just add in our overlay swiping indicators here. There's Z index of 9,900,000, etc. And we have gotten most of our drag gesture work in here. Let's actually now take our user profile cell and let's change out the rectangle for our profile. So we don't need the overlay, we don't need the fill, we don't need the rectangle, but we want the drag gesture. So let's just delete this. Let's add in a Bumble card view. Hold the option, click enter to get the full completion. Triple click, Control M to get the formatting. We need to pass in a user. So let's actually pass in a user here as well. We'll pass in our user. Send a compliment. We don't have any action for it right now. Let's put nil. Super like, same thing. X mark pressed. So if they click that X at the bottom of the profile, we actually want to do the same thing that we've been doing with the user did select. So the same way that they swipe left or right, if you click that button, it should animate left or right. So the X mark pressed, let's actually do user did select. Let's pass in the index. Is like is false. Check mark pressed. Let's do the reverse. So the user did select, except is like is true. And then a hiding report, we don't have an action right now, but we'll just leave it as a closure. I'm going to highlight this, Control I, click fix the formatting. Let's come back up. I think we need to pass in our user of type user. Just like that, we should now have our profile working. Awesome. We got Terry on the screen. It's a stupid little cat. I really don't like this cat. And we can swipe left and we can swipe right. And you're probably going to wonder, I can't swipe up anymore. So the scroll view is no longer working on our screen here. And that's because in SwiftUI, drag gestures need to work with each other. So right now, the drag gesture is taking priority over the scroll view gesture. And that's because the drag gesture is starting immediately. So as soon as we start to move this, SwiftUI thinks, okay, they're dragging it left or right. But we want to actually tell SwiftUI that if I'm swiping up, if I'm not dragging left or right, then it should actually ignore the drag and keep moving. So there's actually a way to do that natively in SwiftUI. If you look at the drag gestures actually have a minimum distance involved. And it's basically saying, make sure that I'm dragging it X pixels to the left or the right before you consider it actually a drag gesture. And it's part of the code here. So I'm actually just going to add a minimum distance. Let's do maybe 10 pixels. So if I don't drag left or right 10, then it's not a drag gesture. So now I can scroll up and I can also drag left and right. So that is a quick, easy fix. That would probably take you a long time if you didn't know what was going on there. Let's click on these buttons, make sure that they work. X works. And let's make sure the check works as well. And just like that, we have swiping on our Bumble home screen. I think it looks really nice. Let's finish this up, just to add a little bit of padding outside of the entire frame here. So on this entire frame here, I just want to add a little bit of extra padding, maybe 8 around the whole thing. That's maybe too much, 4. And that looks nice. Awesome. That is it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. A lot of work here, a lot of drag gesture work. We're really dealing with some cool animations here, but it looks like a very smooth and polished product in my opinion. Love to hear your comments below. I feel like this is something that is pretty reusable, honestly. There's a lot of apps that do swiping, and there's been a lot of different ways to do swiping over the years. So like if you were in UIKit, adding these swipe gestures was a headache. But I think that, SwiftUI has made major waves in working on this. And so just to wrap up again, we added a drag gesture. We talked a little bit about simultaneous gestures. A couple of the magic things that we added in this video was, firstly, we're managing which cards we're going to actually draw onto the screen. We're not rendering every single user at once, just the previous, current, and next. And then we are manually tracking the current index of the user as well as the offset, whether or not the user swiped left or swiped right. And that's all pretty much reusable code. Anyway, leave a comment below your opinions on this. I'm excited to hear it. And in the next video, we're going to get started on the next screen in Bumble, which is going to be the chat screen. It looks a little bit like this. It's going to be easier than what we just did in this video, but I think it's worth just going through the motions. Thank you all for watching. As always, my name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.